too early. So it's really important to know what to start when. What does leggy mean? Yes. Leggy means that the stem is very thin and spindly, and the leaves are small and very spaced out. So it basically is shooting up, and it's trying to get the light, whatever light there is, but there's not enough, so it keeps shooting up instead of spreading out and growing big, strong leaves. Does that make sense? Okay. This Triana, you may have seen this with your plants. It's one of the most common problems is leggy plants. Yeah.
So then I learned to put the light down lower.
Right.
And then they grow out more.
Yeah.
But then I think it's starting them too early, and then I had to learn to start them later. So yeah, it's just a learning process.
Right, it's a learning process. So some of you received this chart last week, but on this chart we have, let's see, for your planning, your garden planning, we have how much spacing they need between the different plants, how high they're going to grow. And then the next column is when you should start these plants inside. So, for instance, some of them, you'll notice celery and onions, you can start in February and March. Other things you don't start until May, like zucchini and winter squash. And sometimes you can kind of look at the size of the seeds. This isn't true for all seeds, but a lot of times the bigger seeds, like sunflowers, squash, you have to start later because there's so much energy in those seeds that they grow really fast and they'll get root bound really fast. Whereas the smaller seeds don't have quite as much energy in them, they're so small. And so most of the time it takes them longer to germinate and it takes them longer to grow. Let's see. Okay, and then if you'll also notice that some things on this chart say NR, which is not recommended. And that's because a lot of things actually don't transplant well, or it doesn't make sense to start them early. And a lot of these are the root vegetables, like beets and carrots and things like that, because what happens when a root vegetable germinates is that it puts its energy down first, and then it puts its energy up to create the leaves. So generally, if it's a root vegetable, they have a long taproot and they won't transplant very well. And for most root vegetables, you can start them really early in your garden anyway, and if you're planting rows and rows of carrots, does it make sense to start them early and then transplant them, It's just as easy to throw them in your garden in the beginning of May when you can get out there. Before even the last frost comes, you can start them in your garden. So there's no need to start them inside. Let's see. And then the third column, or actually it's the fifth column, is transplant. So this is when should you transplant the starts outside. So some things you really have to wait till it warms up, like beans. Do not like the cold weather, you have to wait till it really warms up. Other things like broccoli you can start planting outside in May, even before the last frost, as long as you can get into your garden and it's warmed up a little bit. Put them out there, throw some re-May, just floating row cover over them, and that will protect them from any last frost that come by while they get established. Yeah. Okay. And when all else fails, you can always read the packet with your seeds in them, and it should tell you about when to start it and about when you can plant it out. Although I've noticed that a lot of packets are more geared towards the south, So they'll be like, oh, plant cabbages outside, and I would never start my cabbages outside. You could, but I always start them early in the greenhouse. It's easier to like get them spaced out right, and it's much easier to just get them started outside, inside, and plant them outside. Other things, you know, I don't know, tomatoes, they say plant outside the seeds, and it's like, no, that won't work here. So read the seed packet, but with a little bit of discrimination, you know. Maybe if it sounds funny to you, you might want to double check it on the internet or something.
So for your cabbages, what kind of seed pot would you start them in, like general seed starter kit? And
Yeah.
and how big do they get before you transplant them?
It depends on how early you start them. Let's see, Clarissa, could you look in one of those purple tubs and grab out some of the 6-packs?
Sure. I think it's in the bottom. The bottom.
Okay.
Got it. Yeah. So I start all my seeds in these cell packs that you would normally buy the plants in the nursery. And you can get, they sell these at Alaska Mill and Feed. You can actually, if you don't have any from previous years, you can buy a tray and you can buy enough of those cell packs to fit in there. And it's like $2 or something for the whole thing. And that way I have a whole tray of starts. And like for cabbages, they stay in there the whole time. So I start them, let's see, cabbages, you start them 6 to 8 weeks before you plant them out. So I usually start them in end of March, beginning of April. So, let's see. Yeah, so then when I transplant them out, you know, they're about that tall. Yeah.
And you're putting it right in the ground then, right?
When I transplant them? Yes. Yeah. The only thing that I pot up, which is when you transplant it from a smaller pot to a bigger pot, are things like tomatoes. Tomatoes are kind of a special case because tomatoes have hairy stems, and if you bury those stems in the soil, then each of the those hairs will develop roots, and so it will make your root system on your tomato much stronger if you bury the stem a little bit. So I pot them up a couple times. Each time I take off the lower leaves and then I bury the stem in the soil. And that gives me really strong tomatoes.
If you're doing a container gardening, what would you transplant out to containers? Or would you transplant any differently?
If I was transplanting into containers
Yeah, like
outside,
out on balcony or
no,
something.
I would do it the same. Yeah,
Because it's a container. You
yeah,
don't have to transplant out, but it would be.
yeah. No, I would. If I was putting cabbage in a container, I would, you know, take it right from that cell pack and put it into the container. Yeah.
So I gathered kind of a mishmash of information. This is a bottomless pit as far as information when it comes to food and nutrition and all that kind of stuff. Might hand out this, begin with you. This, I was just talking, actually, some of the things I've been interested in lately. Here. In my practice, I deal a lot with reactions to foods and trying to figure out the optimum foods. And wheat comes up a lot because you hear a lot about wheat allergies and stuff. It's been in the press a lot. And it seems like everybody's got a gluten allergy kind of thing. And it gets downplayed by the mainstream press saying, oh, everybody couldn't be allergic to wheat, you know, what's going on. And then when I, in certain cases, take people off wheat gluten, do some allergy testing, find out that they're positive to it, a whole host of things can oftentimes get better. But the question came up in my mind is, why do people miss wheat so much? Why do they miss dairy so much? And it's because we have receptors in our brains for gluten and gliadin and casein and lactalbumin from whey. So it's something we evolved with. But what's happened is our food supply has gotten so corrupt